Baghdad, dancers of death, murder in the air with the next breath. Macho queens selling war makers' toys, raining destruction, good old boys. Deathbringer in Queen George's eyes, read his lips, war maker lies. Religious rites, revenging sword, thou shalt kill in the name of the Lord. The sheep and the cattle can't keep from yelling. Some are more than ready, some aren't willing. Volunteering in what they're not dying for. The young Republican Guard, crying for war. Free speech, as free as...
Welcome to What's Ailing the World. This is Dr. Rebecca Carley. This is my second show, and I'm so grateful to Finding Voices Radio for having me on, so I can share a lot of important information with you that you may not know anything about, but that could actually change your life for the positive. Just to give you a brief history, I was trained as a medical doctor, did a residency as a surgeon, and stopped working in the hospitals in the early 1990s after witnessing euthanasia, research fraud, and experimentation on poor people without their knowledge or consent. While contemplating what I would do in the future, I gave birth to my son, who became brain damaged after receiving the recommended vaccines. I then learned about homeopathy, a word never mentioned in medical school, and reversed his vaccine-induced brain damage. This was the beginning of the development of my Hippocrates protocol, which reverses all vaccine-induced diseases in people and in pets. As it turns out, pretty much all diseases in internal medicine are caused by vaccines and other toxins and can be reversed with natural therapies. I do consults for people all over the world developing individual protocols based on taking a detailed history. I do not practice medicine nor give medical advice. Rather, I teach people what I would do if I were they. My websites are reversingvaccineinduceddiseases.com and drcarley, CARLEY.com. I've been doing public access television followed by internet radio for over 17 years, all the while researching vaccines, which are actually biological weapons being used for depopulation. The response of the medical mafia to my work demonstrates how dangerous my information is to the medical mafia and Big Pharma, because obviously they have no intention of making anyone well. It's all about creation of disease and then giving toxic drugs and all kinds of crazy diagnostic tests that have, very bad side effects, etc., as any of you know who have gone into that system. I'm thrilled today to have as my guest a very important person who had shared with me information that if only I had known many years ago. I spent 7 years in 7 courts trying to rescue my son. And then, of course, there was the medical board experience when they claimed I had a delusion of conspiracy. What Al Whitney has found is information explaining the corruption and fraud that's involved in pretty much, it appears to me, the whole global situation controlled by the banksters and aided and abetting by the lawyers, who I call land sharks, who are causing us to be robbed of everything, and also allowing all these agencies, which you'll find out are actually for-profit corporations, to keep on poisoning us in so many ways. Al's websites are Parents Against Mandatory Vaccines, People for Safe Technologies, and my favorite, the AntiCorruption Society.com. She has had a variety of different careers, from respiratory therapy to real estate. She's also been on the board of directors of several nonprofits and was a court-appointed special advocate for abused and neglected children for several years. She's married to a retired physician and has 4 grandchildren. And of course, her life experiences has made her very well qualified to join in any conversation about what's ailing America and the world. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Al. And actually, what we're going to start with, and then we'll start our discussion. You had emailed me a link to a YouTube that you did entitled USA Inc. Exposing the Thieves Who Stole Our Government. It's 9 minutes long, so Jeroen is going to play that for us, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless. Thomas Jefferson. Following is a timeline demonstrating when and how a private central banking cartel got control of the government, the people, and the assets of the United States. Each fact is supported by official sources. Source documents are available at www.AntiCorruptionSociety.com under the tab Source Documents. 1913. With the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, a private foreign banking cartel was made the fiscal agent of the United States. Source document, Representative McFadden, Congressional Record, June 1932. From the website of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, quote, "The entry of the United States into World War I added to the responsibilities of the young Federal Reserve Bank. It helped finance U.S. military expenditures by becoming the fiscal agent of the federal government." 1920. Congress handed the U.S. Treasury over to the same private banking cartel via the Independent Treasury Act. Source document, Independent Treasury Act, 1920. 1921. The Council on Foreign Relations was founded to direct the media. Paul Warburg was its first director. Warburg also drafted the Federal Reserve Act and became the Fed's first governor. Paul Warburg was an agent for the Rothschilds banking dynasty. 1925. The United States Corporation Company was chartered in perpetuity in Florida by its fiscal agent. Source document, Articles of Incorporation, United States Corporation Company. This company was created without the approval of Congress, nor the knowledge and authority of the American people. Note, in 1925, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York had offices on Cedar Street and on Broadway, both cited in the Articles of Incorporation. Source document, Articles of Incorporation, United States Corporation Company. The United States Corporation Company created a maximum of 100 shares of stock. Source document, Articles of Incorporation, United States Corporation Company. The Articles of Incorporation revealed the names of 3 individuals who held only 5 shares. The other shareholders were not identified. 1920s. The U.S. Treasury was raided by the private Federal Reserve Bank, who then caused the Great Depression and bankrupted the United States Corporation Company. Source document, Representative Lewis McFadden. Congressional Record, June 1932. 1933. A state of emergency was claimed, and Congress gave the President unconstitutional emergency powers. Source document, Congressional Record, March 1933. On behalf of the private Federal Reserve, President Roosevelt confiscated the people's gold and forced all to use the Federal Reserve notes from then on. Source document, Congressional Record, March 1933. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation. Therefore, their notes are privately owned currency. The people and the property of the United States was hypothecated and placed unlawfully in a public trust. Source document, Representative Trafficant, Congressional Record, March 1993. Hypothecate means to pledge as security without delivery of possession. 1933. The Internal Revenue Service was chartered in Delaware as a private corporation. It is not a division of the U.S. Treasury. Source document, Internal Revenue Service Corporate Charter, 1933. The United States is a private corporation with unnamed stockholders. A private corporation is its fiscal agent. A private corporation owns and circulates the currency we are forced to use. A private corporation expects us to pay them taxes. The U.S. CEO, the President, has maintained unconstitutional emergency powers for the past 80 years. Source document, Senate Report 93549 and Continuation of the National Emergency 2012-2013. Quote, all United States offices, officials, and departments are now operating within a de facto status in name only under emergency war powers, with the constitutional Republican form of government now dissolved. Source document, Representative Trafficant, Congressional Record, March 1993. Today, as has been demonstrated, the United States is just a corporate franchised network represented by their all-caps names such as State of Ohio. Corporate statutes have replaced laws. A corporate statute is a rule of a corporation given the force of law by the consent of the parties. This consent generally requires a signed contract. From Judge Dale, author of The Great American Adventure, page 102, quote, the federal and state governments are not real. They are privately owned corporations called governments, and the law is nothing more than their corporate regulations called statutes, unquote. As corporations have no souls to save nor bodies to incarcerate, they are just dead legal structures. A dead legal structure cannot represent living people nor obligate living people to laws. Therefore, a corporation cannot be a sovereign government. It can only be a legal structure for commercial contracts, which is all the so-called United States government franchise network is. From Judge Dale's The Great American Adventure, page 10, quote, all of this deception is compounded by the refusal of ordinary Americans to realize, know, or understand that it is this secrecy and duplicity of privately owned corporations being surreptitiously portrayed as American agencies and government that they have come together to fleece the American people. For more information, read Judge Dale's The Great American Adventure. Free online at AntiCorruptionSociety.com.
That is such an excellent overview, Al, of what's going on. And that website has so many important things for you to learn about, AntiCorruptionSociety.com. I strongly suggest you start with downloading Judge Dale's book, The Legal Process. And you can also actually buy the entire book, which I just received this past week. It only costs $7.50 from arccopy.com. Also well worth it. And like I said before, if only I had known. And I know that everybody that goes to court probably says the same thing, because there is no justice. These are corporations. The courts are also corporations. You can check this out for yourself, people. They're all listed on Dun & Bradstreet. And this includes all levels of your local and municipal governments as well. As a matter of fact, sometimes when I'll drive into a town, it will actually say on a sign, incorporated in such and such a year. And I think most people just, don't even see that or don't even think about, what does that mean? Why is my town incorporated? But the ramifications for all of us are so huge. But the good news is that Elle is coming up with strategies to demand a copy of the contract for whatever they're dragging you into court for, the IRS or whatever. And she's come up with some ingenious techniques. And I understand that you're finishing up a booklet on that, correct?
Correct. And just for the record, I've not done this alone. This is what I say about this work is that I'm the primary editor, and I'm the one who does the typing. But the brains behind these strategies, there's a group of us who understand that we're dealing with statutory corporate law. And it is this group that is challenging jurisdiction based on the fact that it's just a corporation. So the strategies are a compilation of a lot of people. But none of the parties involved but me are willing to do the typing. How does that sound? So I take credit for doing the typing. Whatever typo's there, if it's wrong, that was me, not them.
Well, you're also definitely, using your knowledge and wisdom that you've gained over the years to help put it all together, which is so important. And what's the name of that booklet going to be, and when do you think it will be ready to put on your site?
It's probably a whole nother week, and it's going to be called Lawful Strategies in a Corporate System.
Excellent.
And really, a lot of us are aware they're corporations, and the people who work for our government, they know they're corporations. They know this. They have been conditioned to believe that's not a problem. And when you call upon them, and we have challenged, like the public health people, saying, wait a minute, you just work for a corporation. Immediately, they're educated in this. They immediately say, that's only so we can do business. They all have the same response, which makes me believe that that's what they're all taught. It's only so we can do business. And most people say, oh, okay. But then if you stop and think about it, wait a minute. You're not supposed to be doing business. You're supposed to be serving the public's interest.
Right.
Doing business and serving the public's interests are not the same thing. And as we see every day, don't we? I mean, every day we see evidence. In my local government, we see it all the time. In fact, we put up another article, why we can no longer tolerate corporate governments, and that's on AntiCorruption Society. And that was a group of us who came together after observing what happens at our local meetings. And we've got, I think, 12 points there that demonstrate that corporate government is not representative government. You see this all over the internet. I mean, I've seen a million YouTubes where they'll go to the school board meeting. That happened to my husband. They'll go to city council meeting. That happened to my husband. Where they are told they can speak for 2 to 3 minutes, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Now, is that corporate government? No. And then what they've discovered is they are instructed not to answer any questions in public, to make no public statement. So let's say you speak for 2 minutes about some injustice or something that's wrong. They're not going to answer you. They'll say, we'll get back to you. And then one friend went to them and said, you're not going to give us any information. And he says, we're an open book. Call my office. Anybody who wants information, just call my office. So you will see if you start attending these meetings, they go out of their way to prohibit the people in the room. It's a form of censorship from getting a collective understanding of what's really going on. Okay? This is well organized and well orchestrated, and a lot of it is Delphi. They use the Delphi technique all the time when they have meetings, or they have public events for the public to come and join and share what you think and all of that, and it sounds so wonderful. And yet the people in front of the room are the facilitators. They're controlling the outcome of the event. These are all corporate strategies. They're done in private corporations, at their retreats, etc., and they're done in what we consider to be government corporations. So it's one big corporate structure. And no wonder they act like corporations. That's what they are.
Exactly.
And
I
Judge
just
Dale,
want,
I thought Judge Dale did a good job. I really recommend that book. And Dr. Carly, you and I spoke about that, and we spoke about some people see that book and they just can't believe it, and they don't want to read it, and they're upset. And those who've been hardcore in the system love it because now things start to make sense. He makes
yes.
sense out of what didn't make sense before, in my case anyway.
Yes, in my case as well. And actually, I had one experience in a family court situation involving my son where I asked the judge if he was following the Constitution, and he sent me to a psych ward for an evaluation. So I'm serious. So I've had many experiences over the years, and this is the only explanation that you can, wrap your head around, is that they are corporations. And of course, unfortunately, I call them land sharks. All these attorneys who are, quote unquote, representing their clients, but are actually working for the corporations. And they can't do the right thing. They can't admit the truth because they'll lose their bar card. That's how they're entrapped, basically. And this has come up in a couple of situations with attorneys. One of them, Alan Phillips, here in North Carolina, who writes vaccine exemptions for parents. And, of course, we're seeing those exemptions being refused. In New York City, they actually put a cap on the number of exemptions that the schools can accept. And you had sent Alan Phillips all this information, and basically he just said, well, I'm the one that went to law school. You don't know what you're talking about. But, of course, you have all these source documents.
Right.
So it's just a refusal to admit the truth. Right. And I find that extremely troubling, that people are spending money they don't have for these attorneys who are always going to sell them down the river.
Well, and on our website, we also have a piece by Karen Hudis. We promoted an interview that she did last October, where she explained, she's a former World Bank attorney. She is quite controversial, I might add, but she explained how she came to understand what Judge Dale reveals. I mean, it's just more affirmation that Judge Dale is telling the truth about how the legal system really works, and the CRIS accounts and the CUSIP numbers and all of that Judge explained so well in his little book. But she admitted, though, in the defense of all these attorneys, that it took her several days. She was like in shock when people started to tell her to look closer at this. Look at the bankruptcy of 1933. Look at the fact that they have turned our birth certificates into bonds that are sold on the stock market. She said it took her, she was approached by 3 different people, she said, and finally she took a look at it. She didn't want to, but she decided to open her mind, and you and I talked about that earlier, the ability to open your mind and look at something that's in opposition of what you've been taught, right? That's a wonderful skill. It's called an open mind.
Right.
Well, she did that, and she finally had to admit, well, yeah, I had to admit, it's true. It's real. This is what they've done. This is real. And she described it as the bar, and she blames the bar, having created a field of landmines for people to get through. And she said, and it wasn't done, these are landmines, and this was not done by accident. It was done on purpose. So she's very angry at her own profession, and in the interview she gave, she wants the public to demand that the bar disband. She said they should be disbanded for what they've done to the American people.
I totally agree.
I agree, too. And she didn't even begin to go into, how they write these adhesion contracts. Whereas, you either agree to these terms or you don't get service, or you don't get to see the doctor, or you don't get your license. This is all written by bar attorneys, people. Mortgages, the fraudulent mortgage nightmare that we're still suffering the repercussions from. I looked at the paperwork on a mortgage recently. We were going to get a mortgage. we came to terms on the property. We filled out all the paperwork. We gave all our information to the mortgage company. And when we got to closing, I don't know if I had a chance to share this with too many people. We got to closing on this property. They bring out the mortgage document, and on the front page it said, we assign all interest in the property to the lender, all rights to the property to the lender. And then it goes on and gives you like 8 pages of details of the terms and conditions of this mortgage.
Right.
Well, my husband read that at the closing table, and he decided, well, he was going to look to see when we got all our rights back, all rights to the property back. So he goes through the paperwork, and he can't find it. And he asked the lady at the closing, the bank person, where does it say that? And her remark is, I'm sure it says it somewhere. And he said, well, fine, show it to me. And she said, well, I don't know exactly where, but I'm sure it's in there. So we decided to take the paperwork home, not sign it and turn it in, but we decided you've got 3 days, okay, to cancel a mortgage. We signed the paperwork, and we took our copies home, and we read it. And nowhere, honest to gosh, Dr. Carling, nowhere in that document did it say that property rights would be returned once the note was paid. Nowhere. So we rescinded the signature and canceled the contract. But had I had a lawyer in that room, how much you want to bet the lawyer would have said, listen, don't worry about it, this is just a standard contract.
Right.
So there you have it, people. You go to get a mortgage, and on the front page it says you're assigning all rights to this property that they want you to make payment on to them, and nowhere does it say that once you pay off the note, you're going to get all those rights back. There's the problem. Now, a lawyer wrote that, didn't he? Lawyers wrote that deceptive contract to hook people into signing up for a mortgage, thinking they own the house, and at any time they can do whatever they want. And the foreclosure fraud proved it. What we've seen in Ohio and other states, reports have come in that people who had never missed a payment were foreclosed on. So this fraud has been created by the bar. I mean, there's no one else to blame. They create this language that we don't understand. They've done that on purpose. They have rules. They have civil proceeding rules locally. The judges can set up their own little rules for their courtroom. They can decide what evidence can be heard and what can't be heard. Does anybody think this is a justice system? I mean, I'm so glad Judge Dale exposed it. This is not a justice system. We do not have a justice system.
No, it's just us. And the us is the bankers and their aiding and abetting attorneys. And I just want to mention one thing that really shocked my system was this whole idea of mortgages being underwater. Now, how does that work? They do an appraisal on your house. They tell you that it's worth X amount. You get a mortgage for that amount. And then the banksters arrange the crash, which, of course, makes people's houses worth a fraction of what they were appraised at. And why doesn't an adjustment occur in the mortgage? How come they expect people to just, pay that underwater money for a house that's now deemed to be worth a fraction of what it was worth? That's another obvious, idea of the bar.
And they've securitized all these mortgages, so they bundled them into packages, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, blah, blah, blah. They sold them across the planet. Greg Palast did a really good expose on the fact that this was arranged by the Federal Reserve to kind of force other countries into taking these toxic packages of mortgage-backed assets. So when this little package may have 500 mortgages in it. So what happens when, half of them can't make their payment? Well, that whole investment is in the trash, right? I mean, they've created this on purpose to actually loot the country, Catherine Austin Fitz did a great video that you guys can see that's free online, The Looting of America. And she makes the case, and she makes it very accurately. She's not an attorney. But she said they knew they were exporting all these jobs. She can even tell you how they created the housing bubble, how that was manufactured artificially. But she said the banks knew that all these jobs had been exported. And yet they were qualifying people for mortgages that in the 90s would never have qualified. She calls that fraudulent inducement. And my daughter got caught up in that. The people who were doing okay in the building industry, which is where her husband was, were given, we're told the economy's good, the building industry's doing great, you need to buy a house. So she was induced into buying a house when they knew that this was temporary. So she thinks someone should be able to sue the banks for fraudulent inducement because they knew that all of the industry was being exported.
Exactly.
And I think they did, don't you? I know
it's self-evident. This has happened. There's cycles, and we hear the talking heads. I listen to C-SPAN a lot, and we hear them talking about the cyclical nature of the economy, and pretending like that's a natural thing. No, it's not a natural thing. They're creating these bubbles because that's how they steal people's houses, and then they start the whole process all over again.
And you know what I think, and I think other people have agreed with me. The next bubble that they built after the housing bubble, because I know people who are all going into the medical profession, because the medical profession, they sold stock. It's like the growing, if you're an investor, buy in medical technology, buy in medical this, buy in medical that. So their next bubble, in my opinion, is the medical bubble. So while they're making us sick and vaccinating our children, they're ensuring a market for their industry. The more they can make us sick, the more money they make in the medical field. And I now call it, and I know you do too, the medical industrial complex.
Yes.
It is not about health, it's about money. And if people haven't seen that when they go to the doctor or go to a hospital, my gosh, even a group of Harvard physicians wrote an article saying they've even changed the name of what we used to call patient is now considered a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
We're consuming products of the medical industrial complex. I mean, didn't anybody catch that? I mean, they started talking about patients as this we're consumers. We're not living flesh and blood people who get ill or get injured.
Right, and of course, their
That's
quote
corporate
unquote
talk.
yeah,
Right?
their services are being forced on people who are being hoodwinked into getting insurance under this Obamacare scam, where
Yes.
basically they're paying huge deductibles, $5,000 deductibles. Their premiums are going up, and they're still getting the same old crap. There's no doctors that know how to heal if they're just following the standard of care, which the medical mafia puts out there. And so basically the doctors are trapped into doing these things, and it's getting worse all the time. Basically, I've realized for years that they're taking type 2 diabetics, which is basically a chromium deficiency, and transforming them into type 1 diabetics so they have lifelong customers by giving them insulin, which has a negative feedback effect on the pancreas, shuts down insulin production, and also causes autoantibodies against insulin and the pancreas to form. And so this is an obvious example to me of what they're doing. Make people sick, keep them going back to the white coats to get their worthless treatments and very dangerous treatments, and never tell them anything that's going to help them. Doctors don't even know anything about nutrition. When I was in medical school, we had 10 hours of nutrition and 2 years of pharmacology. So that's basically the way the system is set up. And a doctor's medical license is actually an adhesion contract. I realized this years ago anybody can get a copy of Black's Law Dictionary. You'd be amazed what's revealed in there. And the definition of adhesion contract is a standardized contract form offered to consumers of goods and services on essentially take it or leave it basis without affording consumer realistic opportunity to bargain. And so, as you had stated, a way that doctors, or maybe you didn't state it yet, we've talked earlier, but one way that doctors could get out of their adhesion contracts, forcing them to harm and kill people. I mean, that's what it is to be a medical doctor today, is to basically, present a document saying, I didn't realize that I would be forced to, harm people. So I would like to see a copy of the contract that I signed that I would adhere to any of your crazy standard operating procedures that you come up with.
Right. And it's like the in perpetuity. You got your license in 1970. Does that mean that you would agree to any kind of insanity they came up with for the rest of your career? No, you never, ever signed any agreement to stating that fact. Of course, when you got your license, when my husband got his license, you felt that the profession was a profession of good faith, and you never anticipated that they would be asking you to do things like harm your patients. It never occurred to you that would be in your future. So why would you even think to mention it? Well, now we know it's in everyone's future. New World Order Exposed. It's on Rents. People can read it. It was a pediatrician. I don't know if you've run across that yet, Dr. Carly. I believe the pediatrician's name was Dr. Daly, and he gave a talk in Pittsburgh in 1969, and telling these pediatricians what was in their future. And he was a member of the Planned Parenthood. He was like an insider. He must have been a Freemason, but he was an insider, and he was cautioning these doctors as to where medicine was going to go, where actually how the New World Order was going to be brought in. And there's a significant part in that talk about physicians and hospitals. And their plan is to turn hospitals into something very similar to prisons. And they've already accomplished that.
Yes.
When my husband had an episode about 2 years ago, and we took him to to the university, I couldn't get into the emergency department to see him without allowing them go. I had to go through a metal detector, and then I had to allow them to go through my purse, so they wouldn't let me in. And up and down the streets were these black vehicles, these little black van-type vehicles, and all it said, they were all black, and they had white print security. I mean, literally, that place has already turned into what reminds me of a prison.
Yeah, they're pretty much on lockdown. As a matter of fact, there's an article which you've probably seen talking about parents who had a home birth, and they foolishly brought their baby into the emergency room just to be checked out and make sure everything was okay. And they took the child from the parents just because the child had been born at home. And, just like I always say, stay out of the courts if at all possible. Stay out of the hospitals. They're actually so affiliated with the government now that if you carefully read the papers that you sign when you go in, the informed consent, supposedly, basically it states right in there, they can do anything to you they want. And unless you go through that and read it very carefully and cross out what you don't agree to, you could easily end up being an experimental lab rat. So, these are things that people have to realize. And go ahead.
Yeah. Here's the thing. They might give you a hard time, and people have said, well, then, in fact, I tried this. We tried to put something in the record when my husband was in the hospital, and they came back with a retort, But people have to realize that unless they're willing to go in writing, if you're saying I can't agree to all these terms, and they say, well, we can't admit you, now you have to be calm and look them dead in the face and say, are you saying that you're denying me medical care because I won't agree with unreasonable terms on your form? Please put that in writing, and I want you to sign it with your name and the date. So for the record, we've got that down. In other words, we always have to be calm, never belligerent, and go back and say, if you're going to deny me care, I want it in writing. Because of the fact I won't agree to unreasonable terms, I want it in writing, and I want you to sign and date it, and we're going to have witnesses. Because that's what you're saying, that you deny me care because I won't agree with unreasonable terms. We got to be a lot bolder, Dr. Carly, than we've been.
Yes.
And you don't have to be rude to make that kind of comment. You can be very calm and polite, right?
Oh, you must be, because if you raise your voice, that's when they start calling security. So
Right.
you must remain calm. That's key.
That is key. And I think it's not hard to remain calm when you understand that what they're doing, they're just a little paper pusher, and their boss is having them to do something completely unreasonable, and all you're doing is saying, I can't agree to this thing, it's not in my best interest. If you understand it and get it over in your head again and again and again, what's going on, somebody at the top is making policy. The little guy sitting across the table from you is paid to enforce it. Okay? There's somebody at the top doesn't know you and could care less. All they want is their profit, and they want to eliminate their liability. They're all corporates. People, if you haven't seen The Corporation, it's free online. I suggest everybody watches it, because that's the world and the reality in which we live. All corporation. It's a for-profit machine, and it sees the world as nothing but assets and liabilities, profits and losses. And that's because it's a dead legal fiction. It's not real. It's just an instrument for making money, and the people who want to make the money don't want to be held accountable for their nasty behavior. That's why they have the corporation.
Exactly.
So I think if people understand that, then it's easier to be calm. They're dealing with a dead legal fiction that is asking them unreasonable, that is trying to extract everything it can, take control over all resources, including human, for profit, and eliminate all liability and losses. And it's everywhere. It's in the grocery store. It's certainly in the bank. It's in hospitals. This model has been replicated and duplicated across the planet. Unfortunately.
Exactly.
Unfortunate.
Yes. And also very important for people to realize is that the hospitals, they don't want you to get better, okay? As a matter of fact, especially doctors that work in the ER, I've seen a few exposés of, where their admission numbers are tracked. And if they don't admit enough patients into the hospital, then they have some kind of a problem. And it was amazing. I was watching C-SPAN's Washington Journal one morning, and they had some hospital minion on there talking about quote-unquote healthcare, which is actually disease creation. And he made an analogy of hospital beds to hotels, that they have to have a certain amount of people, admitted to be in the hospital for the hospital to make a profit. And occasionally, little truths like that slip out. I thought that was amazing. But just go in realizing, the only way I would ever go into a hospital, I would have to be unconscious, first of all, after some kind of trauma. But that's the only way I would ever go in, because I know what they do. I saw what they do. And the people that oftentimes work there, I'm sorry, they are psychopaths. And they will do anything they're told as long as they get a paycheck. And, of course, this is true with lawyers and police officers. And like you said, the system is spread like a virus throughout
Yes.
all of our institutions, and not just here in the States, but in many other countries as well. But I think here they've gotten it down to,
Well, if you go back and you look, there is a wonderful series of the BBC. Adam Curtis, I believe is his name. He did several fabulous documentaries, and he did a series on BBC called The Trap. And it's 3 episodes. And the very first episode is called F blank 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 you buddy. And you click on that, and last I saw it was free online. And it talks about how they use computers in the game theory. Okay? That one episode fills in so many pieces to the puzzle. How that they had computers and they were going to try to, there's a wonderful movie, I think it's called War Games, that came out years ago, where the computer was asked to analyze, well, if Russia did this and we did that, what would be the outcome? Well, what if we launched this missile there and they did this missile here? And so they put the computer to work on what were the odds. How would Russia behave if we were the aggressor in a nuclear conflict? And how would we behave if Russia was? And it's called War Games. And this is pretty much what Rand Corporation and John Nash did. They put all of these possibilities into the computer during the Cold War to analyze what would be the outcome if this happened or that happened. It's a wonderful little 1 hour explanation of how they brought computers into the system, and then they decided that they could measure things based on numbers. Computers can measure things based on numbers, things that they can't do without computers. They'd have to rate people as good, bad, or indifferent. Well, now you can rate people on a scale of 10, and you are around, I'm sure, Dr. Carley, to see when they decided to rate pain on a 1 to 10. I mean, yes. I was around when they would say, well, how bad is your pain, moderate, mild, mild, moderate, or severe, or excruciating? That was like when I first started in medicine, that's kind of how we talked about pain. I don't know about you. But then I saw this change where you go to a doctor, and if you're complaining of pain, he wants a number. Now, do you remember when they changed and decided that everything had to have a number?
Well, that's pretty much the way it was since I was in medical school in the early 80s. So I think it must have changed before. But
right.
Yes, I mean, basically, they're using strategies and statistical analysis.
Right.
And oftentimes it's to figure out how much damage they've caused with what they've done.
And let's not forget they put a profit in it. How much did we make from this and how much did we make from that? Everything's got a profit. A value added is a term. And incidentally, that value added term showed up in the document Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which everybody needs to read. That explains the bankers' strategy, their goals, and how they've been doing this, and how actually it's dependent on our consent. But right. In there's one of the pages that it talks about evaluating soldiers' value added. How much is this soldier worth? How much will this soldier earn? How much will this soldier bring us? Again, changing this life of this young man into a mathematical formula that a computer can put a value on. So what they've done is what you and I would have called an actuarial table that the insurance companies used to come up with and probably still do. Now they've taken that model and they've thrown it everywhere. It's everywhere. It's a corporate model based on mathematics and facts that can be collected into a computer. Even the Common Core program that's been introduced across the country in our schools, I looked at the statutes for Ohio, and lo and behold, they passed a statute putting in a value-added system for evaluating teachers. It's going to have points. Each teacher will be evaluated by points. It's a marketplace model. Really, it's a corporate market model. And they're putting it in their schools. They're putting it in our hospitals. It's pretty much gone everywhere. And again, it's the corporate model. That's why. Corporations see everything as profit loss, right?
Right. Well, not only that, but when push comes to shove, they have no responsibility to do the right thing. I mean,
Right.
basically, they can pollute, they can kill, they can,
Right.
do whatever they want. There is no liability once you're a corporation.
Right, and their
So-
liability is all in dollars, right? So, and in the movie, the corporation makes that point. Okay, you can kill a whole town, but you have to weigh this, and this is what they do. How much will it cost us if we kill off this town? And how much would we make? What would be the profit for doing it, and what would be the loss? It all goes into a mathematical profit loss.
Right.
So-
Well, it's called disaster capitalism.
Exactly.
They create these disasters, and the HARP machine is an excellent example of this, as well as the chemtrails. Why do you people think we're having all this crazy weather? It's not global warming. Carbon dioxide is not the bad guy. That's what plants make. It's part of their respiratory cycle. Or they use it, and then, we get the oxygen that they create. So this is another gigantic scam that they're foisting on the people. And I live in North Carolina. We're pretty much cooking down here. It's getting close to 100 pretty much every day. And, all these different places. I just heard on the news last night there was a tornado in upstate New York. I lived in New York most of my life. We never had any tornadoes.
Right,
So-
and let's just say they want to, this weather warfare, I'm afraid, people, I'm sorry to say, I see signs that it's going on across the planet.
Yes.
If you read Tom Bearden, he calls it scalar weather weapons. So what did they do in Vietnam, Dr. Carly? Remember, they created the monsoons. They artificially created early monsoons, and they were relentless. And that stopped the farmers from planting, right?
Mhm.
This is weather warfare.
Yes.
And let's say they want to make a rainy season and flood out the farms in Idaho or Iowa. Well, that means that they're taking moisture away from maybe California, so they have a drought in one place and a flood in another. Nature doesn't do this, folks. I mean, yes, nature does have dry moments, but this is not nature.
No.
Nature reaches a homeostasis. And this is not. This is manipulation of the weather for whatever their goals might be. But back to the corporations, Dr. Carly. I'm on a radio program on Saturday nights called In Defense of Humanity. And something I don't hear a lot of people talking about, and I know you're going to agree with me, is priceless. What's priceless?
Health.
In the corporate system, nothing is priceless.
Right.
But you and I know that the real world, priceless is everywhere. Priceless is a child. Priceless is a rainbow or a sunset or the most gorgeous flower or a fabulous garden. I mean, that you're going to eat. That's priceless. The corporations can't stand priceless because they can't measure it. Well, I happen to believe that the living natural world in this planet that we call home, most of it is priceless.
Yes.
And that is why I am absolutely working very hard to get people to understand a dead legal fiction called a corporation cannot even see priceless. The things that matter most to us. I mean, how much does love cost? What is the figure, monetary figure you can put on love? You can't. It's priceless. That's why we have to get rid of this corporate model. And I know I'm probably, yelling into a tunnel where nobody's really listening because it's so ingrained everywhere across our planet. But, You can't have a dead legal fiction, a fiction governing reality. That's what we've got. Reality, which is priceless and beautiful and industrious and creative, needs to be controlling the fiction, and not the other way around. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I purport we get rid of the fictions. As a matter of fact, what I love about your information is it gives a solution. You know, we're not just trying to scare people. There is a solution here, folks. You ask for a copy of the contract, whatever it may be that they're trying to suck you into. And you've told me about some amazing cases where people have done that, and all of a sudden the case is dismissed or whatever. And that's why I will highly promote your book on lawful strategies when it's ready. I think everybody needs to get a copy of that and start using these techniques. You have nothing to lose, because once you get sucked into the courts, it's over. I know. I spent 7 years in 7 of them, and that's how I figured out, oh, now I see why we have appellate courts and appeals courts and blah, 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 because one court screws you over. So what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to file an appeal or whatever. And one of my most amazing experiences was in the appellate court in Brooklyn, one of my many appearances. I did not have a land shark. I represented myself because I had no money. But, of course, you know, that always gets you screwed anyways. If you don't play the game, they're going to do whatever they want. But I had a panel of 3 judges, and one of the judges actually said that we have statutes that we can do whatever we want. If we want to do A, B, or C, we pick out the statute that will give us an excuse why we're doing that. And that was one of my many Twilight Zone moments. I'm like, wow. So there is no such thing as the law.
They have that is confirmation that it's a statutory court. Okay, that's another very personal, very real affirmation. It's statutory court. What are statutes? Statutes are the rules made by the corporation. Now, on our website, the AntiCorruption Society, people can get this right away. I mean, they can get to it today. Go to that page, source documents, scroll to the very bottom, the legal process by Judge Dale, retired. I have that right here on my desk. Everybody needs to have that on their desk. Everybody needs to read it, understand it, keep it by them. Judge Dale is telling us how their system works. Didn't you love that information, Dr. Carly?
Yes, and I totally agree with you. Everybody needs to read this. And it's going to be hard, okay? Because see, one of our biggest problems here in America with a K is that, you know, we're told we're the best country on the world, and, you know, our legal system may not be perfect, but it's the best there is, blah, blah, blah. No, people, it's all a lie. And if you don't face reality, you must face reality, because we're already dead. That's what I always say. We're already dead. Each person has to decide what they're willing to do to cause some kind of a change. Do something. Do anything that you're led to do, but you must do something.
And I like to phrase it, and I know not everybody has come to terms with the fact that they've got a limited time on this planet. They'd rather just not think about it. But here, let's think about it. You all know that you've got a limited time. We've all had a limited time, so that moment will come. So the question is, when the moment comes, are you going to say to yourself, you know, I did my best to improve life on planet Earth. I did my best to improve life for the living plants, the living animals, and the living humans. I did whatever I could. Or are you going to say, I had a really good time, though everything went to heck in a handbasket, and I guess I got to leave now? I mean, everybody gets to make that decision for themselves. What do you want to say in those final moments? I'd like to say I did my best. I did my best, and I had a lot of joyful moments in the process. Because part of our energy that we get, which they try to destroy, is joy. We love joy. We're joyful people. We love holding puppies. We love watching little children play. We love going to the beach and putting our feet in the water. My husband, his heart sings when he works in the garden. All of those things that make our heart sing make us strong enough to engage back in this battle against the corporate fiction that's destroying the planet. I don't think, if we don't recognize that, and they don't want us to recognize it, but the more entrenched I see people get in this battle, I see a lot of burnout. And the main reason I think I'm seeing this burnout is that you deal with things that are so serious that you think if you throw more energy into it, more energy in it, more energy, you'll see a solution. And then you're burnt out. So you have to temper it, in my opinion, Dr. Carly, even if it means you schedule joyful moments. You write it on your calendar. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to spend at least 2 hours doing something that just makes my heart sing. That, people don't understand, that's what recharges your motor. Is
Yes.
that joy. And they don't want you to have that joy, incidentally. I mean, have you noticed how the television programs are so grim? They're so violent. They're sexually disgusting. The happy moments that we used to have when we watched the Bill Cosby show or something, oh no, that's gone. Everything that's on is now Psy-War. It is a Psy-War on that tube. I think you know that, don't you?
Yes. Yes.
And even the movies, right?
Right. Well, I will say that the movies is really the only place they tell us the truth. For example, we've had many movies like Outbreak that discuss, some lethal virus getting out after some mad scientists have created it in a lab. Of course, the disinfo always comes in that they have to develop a vaccine. That's going to save the people. But they do tell us in the movies. That's one way that they tell us what they're doing, because people will say, oh, it's fiction, it's a movie. No, people, listen carefully. You'll find out that almost everything they tell you is true. And that's how they broadcast their plans, because by their sick, psychopathic minds, that's what they're required to do, is tell us what they're doing.
Well, and they relish, and when you read Silent Weapons for Quiet War, that is their primary victory, is our consent. They relish in the fact that people hear the information that Dr. Carly and I try to get out to the public, and then they do nothing. And I know we're not meaning to, I'm not meaning anyway, to make anybody feel entrapped. But when we give you solutions and we try to empower you, in their world, if you don't act on them, that means that you're consenting to what they're doing. I know it sounds screwy, but that's how they've created this world. If you don't, consent is assumed, and we can't say this enough. Consent is assumed unless denied, ... in writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the world. That's what you live in.
What I always say is silence is consent, just like you said. Doing nothing. Allowing things to happen around you. I mean, how brain dead do people have to be to not see some of the horrors that are, going on all around us? And, of course, GMO food is another example. Corporate Monsanto's being allowed to alter our food supply, which is going to be pretty much poison if things don't change. I mean, there's so many examples of these things that are happening. And
Dr. Carly, I'm glad you brought that up, because, you brought up earlier that all these agencies are just corporations, which is why the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, listed on Dun & Bradstreet as a private corporation, shares a patent with Monsanto on GMO. Did you know that?
Yes, you had mentioned that to me earlier.
Yeah, so here you guys think that, or we're told that USDA is protecting the food supply. It isn't true, people. It was never established to protect the food supply.
Well, it's the same thing with the CDC, which is also a corporation, actually with a military bent to it. That's why whenever you see any of these minions doing, conferences or press forums or whatever, they've got their military uniforms on. They also have patents regarding vaccines that they share with Big Pharma. So this is one reason that the vaccine agenda is being pushed so hard, is because they're making money off it. They're killing and maiming your children, causing infertility. I mean, the list is endless. And actually, there's a new show starting, I think, this weekend called The Lottery. I don't remember what network it's going to be on, but basically that show's about when there's pretty much no reproduction going on anymore. And they have a lottery to decide who's going to be able to procreate. I mean, we can't ever forget the depopulation agenda of these psychopaths. Getting the world population down is one of their biggest goals.
Right. And we did a video, The Dark Agenda of Depopulation, and you and I talked about this. You and Dr. Blaylock seem to be the only physicians that I've known, but I haven't listened to all the physicians who are willing to admit that there's a depopulation agenda going on and the vaccines are a part of it. He brought out accurately, and that is in our questionnaire that we put together, Are You Dangerously Stuck in the Matrix, that, they're replacing us with machines. And people can see that. I'm sure it's happening in Europe. They started in New York, didn't they, with the Automatron, this restaurant where everything was in a machine. And everybody thought that was so cool. You could go get your sandwich out of a machine. Well, now, you check out at a grocery store, you use a machine. You fill your car with gas, you use a machine. You do the machine. You're the slave labor. You're the slave labor at the grocery store. You put your cart in the cart corral. You're the slave labor, So every time they do this, I went to Sears Will Call. I used to be a friendly little department and nice little employees, and you'd ask for your package, and they'd go back and get it. Gone. You punch your info in the machine. So the question we must ask ourselves is, where are all these employees? What happened to all these employees?
Well, and this is happening everywhere. It's happening at the post office. It's happening at ticket counters in airports. I heard an amazing comment. I have television on a lot as I'm monitoring what's going on while I'm working on my computer. And I actually heard some talking head use the excuse why they don't want to raise minimum wage for people that, aren't even making enough to live, like people at Walmart that have to go on food stamps. And their reason is because they have to spend money automating, the fast food restaurants and all these different places, so they can, make more money as a corporation. So they don't want to pay the people. They want to just get rid of them. And where are they going to go?
Where are they? And when you used to go and we have a grocery chain called Kroger. I don't know if you have Kroger, but we do. Lots of Krogers. You used to go to Kroger and there would be these employees that would bag the groceries. Okay. Some of them look like they were mentally challenged, but they were perfectly capable of bagging the groceries and perfectly pleasant little people. So I went to one store and the checkout lane had changed. And they had restructured the lane so I couldn't even bag my own groceries. And I asked the clerk, what happened to the checkout lane? It's different here. She said they got rid of the old one so that the checkout clerk would have to do all the bagging and they could fire all the baggers.
Wow.
Now, here's the question that we need to ask ourselves. They're going to accuse us of being Luddites. You don't want to be a Luddite, People can look that term up. Al Gore dragged that term out in a talk that he did. We have to have progress, and we don't want any Luddites. Well, hello. Is this a better world? Is this the world we want? We would like a say in our future. Thank you very much. We aren't getting one. Right now, we aren't getting. The corporation is deciding our future for us. A fiction, a dead legal profit Pac-Man machine is deciding our future for us. It isn't going to be easy to turn this around, but I never voted that. I never, ever voted for that. And I don't any of the people on the planet did.
as long as you brought up the voting word, that's another thing that amazes me, is that people are so brain dead. They're still voting. Don't you see that anybody that's allowed to run for quote unquote office as part of that corporation, wherever it may be, they're picked because they're willing to go along with the program. I
Right.
mean, Jim Trafficant did us a huge service by giving out certain documents, and obviously we know that's why he ended up in federal prison. I think it was he allegedly had some of his staffers doing some work at his home or some garbage. But, you know, he actually, you know, knew what was going on and gave out information. And, you know, there are people in every area, whistleblowers that are coming forward. I know we talked earlier about somebody that worked for the EPA that they got rid of because he discussed fluoride. I mean, these people in these agencies are not protecting us. That's one of the most important things you have to realize, and that should be self-evident at this point. And basically the ones who do so without, you know, objecting, giving their consent so they can get a paycheck, they're a very big part of the problem, and this happens everywhere.
You know, and I'd like to share with the audience an alternative to this that some of us have been thinking about for a very long time. Let's say you work for Monsanto, and you finally decided to accept the fact that your job requires you to do things that are causing harm. Just think how empowering it would be if all the people who are trapped in that corporate system, and they're hoping to have everybody employed by corporations. They're doing their best to get rid of all little businesses. Since you're running your own little business, you understand how much pressure they try to put on to put you out of business. Mm-hmm. But if you're working for a corporation and that is your paycheck that puts the roof over your head, there are a myriad of ways that every day you have opportunity where you could put little sticks in the machine. You can forget to send something out. You can forget to record something. You can record the wrong number. There are so many ways that the people, even those working in the machine, can use the fact that we make mistakes and can actually slow this machine down from the inside without necessarily losing your job. Just think of how powerful that would be if all the employees of corporations all of a sudden started making little mistakes, forgetting to do things, record the wrong information, don't give a message. And that is possibly why they want to replace us all with machines, because machines don't have any commitment to life or any living thing. Can't even recognize it. There's such a similarity between a robot and a corporation, don't you think?
Yes. Right. And I totally agree with what you're saying, is that, you know, there's many ways people can do something. Unfortunately, there's many people, obviously, who are willing to do whatever they're told, even when they know it's doing harm, to get a paycheck, oftentimes believing that because they're part of the machine, that they'll be left alone. You know, not realizing they're being sprayed with pesticides and chemtrails and eating garbage food and having their children, you know, damaged from vaccines, and the list is endless. And, you know, now we're hearing a lot about this radiation from Fukushima. In my opinion, that's a perfect example of a psychopath being involved in Japan, building 4 nuclear reactors on one of the most active fault lines in the world. Surprise, surprise, when, you know, everything went south. And we're hardly ever hearing now on the news that there's, you know, radiation in the air, in the water. All the sea creatures and vegetables are being poisoned and mutated. And, you know, what's anybody doing about this? Apparently not much.
Well, that's just more evidence that these agencies do not work for the goal in which they claim to be serving.
Right.
I mean, where is the EPA on this? Where is the EPA on the fact that in my state there's 300 Superfund sites that haven't been cleaned up in 20 years? If the EPA was really established to clean up the environment and to ensure that we have a clean and safe environment, how come they're not doing it? How come the CDC, if their goal is to prevent disease, how come they're not doing it?
How come they're making viruses in their biowarfare labs? I just have to comment on that whole idea of a Superfund site, which is one of the most outrageous ideas, that once again, the corporations that have polluted various areas in the country, they don't have to pay to clean it up. The EPA, gets taxpayer money. And I had heard some years ago that they spend more than half of the money being given to, the lawyers, so they can fight over which funds are being cleaned up first. And in the end, nothing's getting cleaned up because they're just spending legal fees to argue about it in whatever, administrative court they argue about it. The fraud on the people is so vast. It's really incomprehensible to take it all in once.
Well, and that's why you and I like using the term the Matrix, because
right.
And the thing is that in the movie The Matrix, they told Neo that the people who were in the Matrix didn't want to be told they were in a Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wonderful little video that's free online. I think it's called Plato's Cave. And it talks about an individual. Their reality was they were living in a cave. Well, that's pretty much what's happening in our country and many other countries. We're not told the truth about the legal system. We're not told the truth about the healthcare system. We're not told the truth about the matrix that we're in. And in Plato's The Cave, one individual was removed and taken out into the sun and shown flowers and beauty and streams and rivers and animals and just found the world glorious, and went back into the cave to tell others that, come outside, you got to see this. This is fabulous. But all their life they had known nothing but shadows on a wall, and they wouldn't go. They didn't believe this person. In fact, they turned against this individual. And at the end of the little parable called Plato's The Cave, it says, it doesn't matter that they may turn against you for telling them the truth. You're still obligated. You're obligated morally, no matter what the outcome. You're still obligated morally to try. And I absolutely believe in that. I know you do too. But not everybody's going to want to hear that they're in the matrix. But what they didn't say in that little parable, which is in our world, the Matrix is a very dangerous place to be. And you and I know that. Very dangerous. You go into their healthcare system, Dr. Carly is exposed many times. You go into their military, and they start out by giving you vaccines. Then they send you over and expose you to depleted uranium. Then when you come back, they don't want to pay your health care. How about that? Those guys actually thought they were serving their country, and they find out very painfully that was part of the matrix, selling them on serving their country. Don't you think?
Totally.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's obvious to me that more soldiers are dying from vaccines and, like you said, depleted uranium and other toxins they're being exposed to than are even dying from gunfire. Not that I think it's 45,000 of them that have been killed. Not that that's not enough death from gunfire or IEDs or whatever. But yeah, they suck them in with propaganda. Yeah, we had that 9/11 inside job. So come into the military and go over and kill innocent women and children. I mean, it's just disgusting.
And defend your country. Defend your country that is just a corporation run by the bank, right?
Yeah, defend the corporation, exactly.
That's owned by the bankers. So getting out of the matrix is, it pretty much, I don't see how anybody, you can prefer not to. You can prefer to stay on your deck chair on the Titanic. But as long as you're in the matrix, you're in harm's way. At least when you get out of the matrix, you know many more things to avoid, and you get many more ways of not consenting. Until
Yes.
people get out of the matrix, I don't know that they're going to understand what we're talking about regarding this consent thing. Because first they have to understand that they're consenting to things that are not in their best interest, and this was done by design.
Yes.
Um,
And that by your silence you're consenting. I mean, and of course, all these adhesion contracts that they come up with to force, especially doctors, to, follow these standards of care, which are becoming so insane and harming people, just to keep the hospitals filled and make money for big pharma. In my opinion, that's one of the most important things people need to learn, is what is destroying your health. On my website, reversingvaccine-induced-diseases.com, if you click on the vaccine-induced disease tab, there's 4 diagrams I came up with in the late 1990s. The first one is the big picture. It's the cause of all disease on one piece of paper. Although I don't have all the poisons listed, but once you get the idea, then you understand it. That's why it's so important for people to learn what's harming them, to avoid it as much as possible, to detox what you can. There's homeopathic remedies that will detox just about everything, even radiation. And then stay away from the bad things as much as you can. Because if you don't have your health, you have nothing. And of course, keeping you sick, or keeping your elderly loved one or your autistic child or whatever, keeping you occupied with that kind of a distraction is one way they make sure that you'll never have time to check things out.
Correct. In fact, the system was set up. There's another documentary that was made by Scott Noble called Human Resources, and it's free online. And that was another one, Dr. Carly, that was eye-opening to me, because they talked about when they set up this structure of turning workers into robots, basically. That's what they wanted. They wanted to discourage ideas and innovation at the workplace, because the whole goal was to turn workers into robots. And what they discovered is that if we were denied creativity or denied any voice into how the job is done or how the job could better be done, it would demoralize us. And what would happen when we get demoralized, we would go home and we'd just look for entertainment, and we wouldn't feel empowered enough to get involved in local government, to look and investigate what's wrong with our society. We would just be so beat up that you go and you do your job, and then you come home, and if you have enough energy, maybe you'll play ball, but you're never going to go to a meeting and see what local government is doing because you're just too demoralized. You know what? I was astounded. That is what the robber barons intentionally put in place to unempower the population. So not only would we not be empowered in our workforce and find joy and happiness in our job, so we would be so demoralized we wouldn't question what the banksters were doing. And that pretty much applied to my career and my husband's career. And I think even Dr. Blaylock revealed in one interview that he gave that they did everything they could to discourage creative medicine. They did not want any doctors creating anything or doing anything on their own. And I'm sure you saw that, right? Dr. Carly? Did I lose you? Well, that's the system we've got. That's the corporate system we've got. The corporations don't want solutions coming forward unless it profits them. Right.
And I lived it. I saw the reaction of the medical mafia to me talking about vaccines as bioweapons. I love that term, human resources. I don't remember what year I first noticed it, how all the personnel departments were becoming human resources. Just the name, human resources? I mean, what are we, like a battery?
Absolutely. And I remember thinking the same thing when I saw it. I said, what are you people calling it? Human resources. But that's what they did, right?
That's what they did.
Then we were no longer, Rand Corporation actually had a role in that. Alex Sabila did an interview, people can get it online, where he worked for Rand and he was allowed to look at all their paperwork, much like Carol Quigley was allowed to look at the paperwork of Council on Foreign Relations. And Alex Sabila wrote a book about this and how Rand, which is a private think tank that put together by Rockefeller and other robber baron money, went and created, they wanted to eliminate the citizen and replace it with the consumer. And
Right.
you hear, what do they talk about now? Healthcare consumer. A healthcare consumer used to be, I recall, a patient.
Right.
And
Especially when you're not given any options to what you're going to consume. I mean, basically, your insurance plan only covers drugs, doesn't cover anything that works. And, I mean, the control over the doctors is getting so ridiculous now that based on whatever your insurance is, they'll only cover certain drugs. They're all poison, in my opinion, but, you know, they push the generics, which are oftentimes even worse than the brand name drugs. And it's just getting worse and worse all the time, where you have no choice. You're supposedly given informed consent. There is no informed consent. They don't tell you what all these things do because they don't know. You know, I've had 2 elderly patients, well, I call them clients, who were on 25 pharmaceutical drugs at one time. Just imagine that. I mean, there's no way you can know the reactions of all those drugs together except for how sick it makes the person. But, you know, you go to one doctor, and that's another thing they did to destroy medicine. They chopped up the body into pieces. You know, you go to one person for your lungs, you go to another one for your heart. They've now even divided up neurology into, you know, regular neurology, but they have seizure specialists, which cracks me up because if you look up any seizure drug, you will see that one of the side effects is always seizures. So all these people do, they write you one prescription, you still have seizures, they write you another one. They don't take you off the one you're on, they just keep adding to the mix. And it's amazing to me that more and more people are not dropping dead. The painkiller specialty is another one. They've just come out with another version, I forget what it's called. It's much stronger than oxycodone, and they're going to release this on the public. We have so many people dying of these pain-killing drugs. Actually, you know, much more than street drugs. They're dying from the painkillers. And once they get people hooked on these, what they want to do is transfer you to methadone, which is another opioid. I mean, it's insane what's going on. Anything they can do to just string you along.
Absolutely. And then, and I think if more doctors understood where the Food and Drug Administration, I mean, you have to wonder, well, how did they put that together? Food and drug. And nobody else, well, where did that come from? Food and drug. And then you look back at the history and you realize that the predecessor to the Food and Drug Administration was the Chemical Association. This is the petrochemicals and petropharmaceuticals that were controlled by John D. Rockefeller that wanted the creation of the Food and Drug Administration. So his chemicals, his new drugs, petropharmaceuticals, his petrochemicals he wanted to use in agriculture could get graded as generally regarded as safe. And I do believe that that status remains today on some of these chemicals, generally regarded as safe, and it would eliminate the liability for the harm that was caused by these petrochemicals and petropharmaceuticals if they were approved by this falsely created agency called the FDA.
Right.
And people like Gary Null have done a lot to expose the FDA in demanding that it be torn apart. And I'm not entirely sure that even Gary Null understands why it was created in the first place. It was created to do exactly what it does. to allow them to stand under the umbrella. All of these agencies allow them to stand under the umbrella saying, well, it's been approved by the FDA, the Federal Communications Commission has approved wireless technology. It is this umbrella that all these agencies create, just like the FDA, that the whole network, all these people are standing underneath it saying, well, it's been approved. Therefore, you don't know more than them, so therefore it's okay. That's one reason why Parents Against Mandatory Vaccines, when we got together, I actually started it because I was researching the pandemic. I don't know if I ever shared this with you. And I was following what Dr. Tenpenny was saying and Dr. Blaylock and other people were saying about what was going on. So I started researching my state, Ohio, and looking at the statutes and trying to figure out what the Board of Health in Ohio was doing and whether or not they were going to pass any statute. At the time I thought they were laws, pass any statute forcing everybody to take that vaccine. So as I did my research and I call and tell people what I discovered, I realized that, well, that was taking too much time and I wasn't going to mail everything out. And that was taking too much time, so I said, heck with it, I'm going to put all my research on this website. And then I can refer people to it, and they can go there and find it. And that was the motivation. I just had too much information. It had to go somewhere. So I founded 4 Ohioans, which later became Parents Against Mandatory Vaccines. But the difference in our group and my efforts is that I started all my research kind of knowing that these vaccines were bad. And I came into this by studying statutes, whereas what are the public health statutes? Who wrote what? When? What bills were passed, Mm-hmm. And on our website, our government is a corporation. Scroll down on the left and you click on that, and you will see exactly what I discovered and I wanted to share with people. Our government is a corporation. I figured out they were all corporations. And if you go to that website and you scroll down and look at that, you pretty much see what I confirmed. This isn't, I can prove it. This is not opinion, people. This is not opinion, and so are our schools. This is fact. I have a little chart, the name the public recognizes, and the Dun & Bradstreet corporate listing. And you go down that and you see the Ohio governor is listed on Dun & Bradstreet as the Executive Office, State of Ohio, all caps. The Ohio state legislators are listed as the Legislative Office of the State of Ohio, all caps. The judges, the Ohio Department of Health is listed as Health, Ohio Department of, in all caps. Franklin County Health, all caps. Even my city, and then the Board of Education. That was like my last one. I found out that all of the schools are part of this corporate network. That is significant. I was told it wasn't, but now Dr. Carly sees, and everybody who looks at this starts to realize this is significant. They're not supposed to be for-profit corporations.
Right. And, of course, this involves the education departments as well. In fact, I found out years ago that the schools get denied funding for children that don't get vaccinated with disease. And so, they're all working together to accomplish the same goal. One thing I just wanted to mention, since you brought up the governor, I was amazed occasionally the truth does slip out. I read this paper, CharlotteObserver.com, and on page 4A of today's paper, July 10th, they're talking about South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and they actually refer to her as the state CEO. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And then as they let this out, then the people say, well, that's okay. Well, then you're giving their approval for a corporate entity to pass itself off as a government. They think you don't care. Well, Dr. Carly, the vaccination notice that we worked on, can we talk about that a little bit?
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Okay. On the Parents Against Mandatory Vaccines, the group of us who worked together on this, well, we really started, we just wanted to make a statement to give to the doctor once we saw the refusal to vaccination notice that the American Academy of Pediatrics came up with, which is just hideous. Anybody who's listening cannot sign that document. You have to go to our website and start by clicking on the do not sign and read why you can't sign the refusal to vaccinate form.
Well, let me just mention quickly, because basically you're admitting that you're committing child abuse if you don't vaccinate your child.
That's right. It's an
and
admission of guilt.
Right. And unfortunately, you know, most of us are brainwashed. You're presented with all these documents to sign. How many of you actually read anything before you sign it? Many people don't, especially the higher the pile of pages, the more likely you are just to initial it and go forward. So please continue. Yes, your vaccination notice is an excellent idea.
Okay, so that came about when a group of us saw that horrible, horrible form that was created by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it's polluted with lies. And it wants you to admit that you know you're harming your child, blah, blah, blah. And they wanted, you know, the signature of both parents, and I believe they even want a witness. So we thought, okay, we have to find a way to counter this. It's a one-page form that they have, and there's no way to write in anything and change what they've done, because they put all this thing very compact. It was written by bar attorneys, no question. There's no pediatrician, and when I showed it to my husband, and I'm sure Dr. Carly, being a physician, not a lawyer, you would agree that that form was not written by doctors. That was written by bar.
Of course, yes.
Right. The doctors would never know how to make all those adhesion traps. They just wouldn't know how to do it. That's not what they do. And
right, but they make a trap with the doctor to get the patient to sign it.
Correct.
And if the doctor has read it, then they know you're actually getting them to admit to child abuse. Let's call CPS.
And if the doctor would think about it, if the doctor allows people to come into their practice and not get vaccinated and uses this form, they can track the number of doctors that allow the slip-throughs.
Right.
So this can be used against the doctor as well.
Yep.
So it's not to the doctor's advantage to use that form. But because this form was so awful, we put our heads together and said, well, we can't change the form. We can't draw enough lines through it. So we're going to just have to put on the form, see attached. Okay? Draw a big X through the box of listed vaccines so nobody can add anything there. And in the bottom, you put see attached. That's it. Anything else can be used against you. So then we added a statement. We compiled a statement, and it's called the vaccination notice. And that statement that we compiled and how to submit this notice is also on our website, the Parents Against Mandatory Vaccines. Scroll down and you can click on the item on the left menu called the vaccination notice. Now, this is different than what we've tried before, and I think Dr. Carly agreed when she first saw it. Because what we're doing in this notice is we're discrediting the organizations that are promoting vaccines. And how are we doing that? Merely by identifying them as being for-profit corporations. Okay? That's all we're doing. No one else is doing this. Everyone else.
Wait a minute. That includes the American Academy of Pediatrics, right? They're also a corporation.
Absolutely. And we always talked about what a corporation is. It's a for-profit Pac-Man machine. So we know this. So now we're taking and we're identifying the players. And we are also, in this notice, we are telling the doctor, let me just read can I read a couple lines in here?
Yes, do.
Okay. I am aware that those ordering and or administering vaccines have been granted immunity from liability should my son or daughter suffer from a vaccine-caused injury or illness. The Vaccine Injury Compensation Trust Fund is not an acceptable alternative to me. Reason listed below, number 10. Okay, then we go on to say why we don't acknowledge the CDC as a health advocacy organization or the American Academy of Pediatrics, because they're all for-profit machines and their fiscal bottom line is their number one priority. Ensuring their income is their number one priority. What we're explaining is a conflict of interest, but we're not using the term. All we're doing is stating facts. I do not recognize the CDC as a government health advocacy organization. It is a corporation listed on Dun & Bradstreet and headquartered in the all-caps state of Georgia, with strong ties to the pharmaceutical industry. Therefore, their recommendations are influenced by the fiscal health of their corporation. That's just fact, people. There's not a judge in the land who could find that not true. It is not opinion. It is not controversial. It's just fact. This is what the vaccination notice is designed to do, is to disclose facts that aren't even talked about in most arenas. I don't think doctors are, Dr. Carly, I don't think doctors know this. But here we're going to tell them, and we're going to tell them how to find out. They can all go look it up on Dun & Bradstreet. These are facts that are easy to verify. Okay?
I'm just curious, why didn't you want to use the term conflict of interest?
Because it isn't a conflict of interest. In other words, once you know they're a for-profit corporation, it is in their interest.
Ah, okay. Good point.
Right?
Yes.
They were not set up to protect the public. So there is no conflict there. What the conflict comes in is when they misrepresent themselves. But
Right.
we're exposing who they really are. And we're telling them we don't think they're credible because of who they really are. Then we go down to say in this notice, I'm aware that many physicians are paid higher reimbursement rates for administering vaccines. Most patients don't know that. Doctors don't volunteer that information. Now you're telling the doctor, hey, I know they give you more money if you do this. And the doctor knows that's true. So
Right.
that's not a false statement, and he's not going to be very comfortable with it, actually, if you want to know the truth. Then we go down to say, I'm aware of multiple scientific peer-reviewed papers that have exposed the dangers of many vaccines and the herd immunity myth. We're not necessarily engaging in a controversy where we're going to fight my science versus your science. My scientist is better than yours. Dr. Carly knows more than Dr. Offit. I don't want to go there. What we're going to do is create a controversy by stating that we know for a fact there are peer-reviewed papers that have exposed the dangers of vaccines, period. This is not so that they can discredit any particular physician or any particular researcher. All we're doing is adding in the creation. We are discrediting the CDC, and we're saying that we don't take their recommendations as regarding health as valid, and then we're saying, and we know that there are multiple peer-reviewed papers that are saying the opposite. So then we go down and we admit, this is number 10 that we referred to. I'm aware that the corporation Health and Human Services, United States Department of. That is the Dun & Bradstreet listing for the Department of Health and Human Services, all caps. Listed on Dun & Bradstreet and headquartered in Washington, D.C., determines claims paid from the Vaccine Injury Compensation Trust Fund via a secret administrative procedure, and also profits from vaccine patents. Now we're explaining why to the doctor, to the school, and to anyone else or your employee that you're going to give this notice to. This is why you're not accepting this Vaccine Injury Compensation Trust Fund as a substitute for the fact that the big pharma has been relieved of all liability from the harm their vaccines cause. So they're going to try to tell you, but that's okay because you've got the Vaccine Injury Compensation Trust Fund. And now we're saying, no, we're not accepting that. And we're giving the truth about that one as well. So in the end, we end up saying, as parent or guardian, I am prohibited by law to endanger my child. So for the reasons I have listed and more, I deny permission for anyone to administer CDC recommended vaccines to my son or daughter unless they provide me with a vaccine package insert, which they don't want to do, I might add. Allow me to determine if the health risks are acceptable, and sign a document stating that they personally, not me and or my spouse, will be responsible for any injury or illness as defined by the International Medical Council on Vaccine the vaccine they administer might cause. This is the hot potato that it's all about. I think Dr. Carley will agree. They want the parent to have the liability for the injury.
Right.
They're giving it to the parent. And if you vaccinate your child, that's what they want. They want you to get the hot potato. And you are saying in this notice, I do not accept the hot potato. I am not taking the liability. Thank you. You cannot force me to be liable. And I am telling you in writing, no thank you. So I think the other approaches didn't address some of these important issues. I don't know how you feel about that, but the exemption doesn't do this. The exemption doesn't bring out to the legislator or anyone else's attention this elephant in the room, which means the drug companies have been given immunity from liability. None of the exemptions even talk about it, Dr. Carley. Now I can see when I started looking at this why they've made so little progress by going down the religious exemption route.
Yeah, well, it's insane, first of all, because basically you're, pretty much crawling to them on your hands and knees and saying, will you accept my exemption? All they have to do is say no. Like I said, they've already created a cap on exemptions in New York City. So that's not a solution by any way, shape, or means. And the idea that, everybody would be going to attorneys like Alan Phillips to get a religious exemption, the only quote-unquote religion that I know of that is against vaccines are the Christian Scientists. So if you're any other religion, that's probably not going to fly anyways.
Well, and here's the thingy, Bob. I mean, how easy is it for a doctor to ask the child, if he ever gets the child alone, do you go to Christian Science church? Have you ever seen your mom in church or your dad in church? Or, in other words, this is just like, it's waiting for entrapment.
Yes.
Now, when I told my husband about this religious exemption, he said, I shouldn't have to claim a religious exemption. I should just be able to say no.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. He said, why should I make up some religious affiliation? I should just be able to say no.
Right.
And I said, you're right. But these attorneys won't make any money if you find a way just to say no.
Yes. As a matter of fact, when I first had a discussion with Alan Phillips years ago, when I first moved to North Carolina and I found out about him, I had actually told him that my mission is to stop this insanity. And, the vaccines needed to be stopped, period. And his answer to me was, well, I make money by making religious exemptions, so I'm not interested in stopping the vaccines. And that really made me sick that he said that. But, of course, he's an attorney, so what do you expect? But, yes, I mean, what is it about vaccines? You can refuse any other drug, although that's going to be harder in the future because they're now putting chips in pills so they can monitor whether you're quote-unquote compliant. But why is it that vaccines are the one thing mandated, that everybody's supposed to take them and they keep making up more and more reasons all the time? How does that work? And I know the answer because the corruption in the immune system caused by vaccines is largely involved with all diseases and internal medicine. And so that's a very important thing that people have to realize and, wrap your head around that. As a matter of fact, I tell parents, if push came to shove, I would homeschool my children Now, I know that many people can't afford to do that. But, what's more important, your children's health or, having a new car in the driveway? Of course, now we're finding out that some states, I know California already passed a law that they can vaccinate your children without your knowledge or consent. So schools are becoming vaccine clinics. What's up with that?
And what could stop them from being able to do that, right? You got to have a vaccination notice on their record. There's no other way. There's no other way but to have this notice on the record at the school.
And to tell the child, if anybody comes near you with a needle, run.
Well,
Run.
I think if you have this notice, it will kick up such a fuss. Because what you will be doing is transferring the liability and injury to them. It won't work to just say no. You have to transfer the liability to them with your notice, your lawful notice, which is witnessed, so they know you're a living flesh and blood person, human, man or woman, whatever we want to call it today. This notice has to be in their record, because this notice is you're declining in writing to accept the liability. Because they're all corporations, remember, they don't think of life as priceless, right, Dr. Carly? It all has a numerical value. That's all a corporation can do is evaluate human resources. So we're telling them that we're alive and we're not accepting the liability. And we have to do that. I don't see any other way around. The people that I'm working with on this topic and on these issues, we have not seen any other answer once they came out with that California statute and the refusal to vaccinate form. We put our heads together, we paced around the house. We could not conceive of any other way to respond to this. And as people give us feedback, we're prepared to improve it, to modify it. We're prepared to make it a work in action, a work in progress. But this is what we started for, because we've got to get something down on paper denying to accept the liability.
Right.
And that's where we got to start.
So I think copies of that should be given to the pediatrician and the school.
Right.
Both. Have you gotten any reports back of anyone trying this and what they experienced?
No, we have not. And I'll tell you, we can invite this. It's very difficult if people don't want to, I spoke with Ingrid Castle, and I think she's going to be a guest on your show. She'd be a great guest.
Yes, in 2 weeks, talking about the standard of care, yes.
Great. Well, and she and I spoke about this, and until people volunteer responses, we're not going to know. There's just no way of knowing. There's no way of saying you can't have this unless you promise to tell us how it works, So we're just time will tell. And I wouldn't be afraid to use it, because what they are doing is backing you into a corner with that refusal to vaccinate form. They are trying to make you liable.
Right.
And they do it all the time. And that's what the form is designed to do. It's deny consent and refuse liability, and identify who the players really are.
Right.
So,
well,
go ahead.
I think it's ingenious, and like I said, all three of your websites are excellent, but I think people should start with the AntiCorruption Society first and read the 18-page document by Judge Dale that's there, so you can grasp the big picture. And then, of course, all parents who are waking up to the dangers of vaccines, they have to take their power back and take a stand to protect their children, because, I've developed a protocol to reverse these injuries, but it's much better not to get them in the first place, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not going to get better. I think everybody, when you saw that vaccination compensation trust fund, I don't know if you knew where that money goes or who's managing it, but it's the same old crooks. It's the same old crooks that are behind our entire system right now, the creatures who create the private currency known as the Federal Reserve Note. That compensation trust fund is run by the U.S. Treasury. Well, when people listen to that, thank you very much for playing it, that little YouTube on USA Inc., you heard that the Treasury was turned over to the private Federal Reserve. So who's running the compensation trust fund? The same bankers, folks.
Well, not to mention the fact it's almost impossible to even get a case into vaccine court because they use all kinds of excuses, especially they have some arbitrary time after vaccine by which the damage has to become evident, and it can take months, it can take years. So they find any excuse they can not to allow you in the first place, and despite that fact, they've paid out over $3 billion, I think was the last term I heard, since the 80s when this insanity was started, thanks to Barbara Loe Fisher of the National Vaccine Information Center.
And here's the thing that people can hopefully come away with. What in the name of Hannah gave the state legislators the idea that they can insist that you vaccinate your child with a product produced by a corporation that doesn't warrant its own product?
Right.
Think about it. When they eliminated liability, now we've got the drug cartel has no obligation to produce a safe or effective product. By doing that hideous, unbelievably horrible act of removing liability from the corporations and then turning around and insisting that the schools force this unwarranted product that the corporations make no claim is safe or effective because they have no liability is insane, Dr. Carly.
Yes, it is.
That is truly, once they remove liability, the schools should have dropped out of the game completely, and said, we're not going to insist. The state legislators should have said, are you crazy? We cannot insist children take a product that's produced by a corporation that is not responsible for the harm their product causes. Why, in the name of Hannah, would they do that?
Well, because the schools are corporations too, and they're all in on this together. And of course, the legislators are practicing medicine without a license in the first place, even by coming up with these arbitrary schedules where they just keep adding and adding and adding, even though we see the health of the children going down. I mean, try to find a healthy child today, a really, truly healthy child. Most likely it's going to be the child of a chiropractor or the Amish. They're another group that don't vaccinate. Other than that, it's really hard to find a child that doesn't have some autoimmune or asthmatic condition, whatever.
Correct. And how many children ended up with these ear infections? When I was a kid, I don't remember any of my friends having ear infections. However, when they started vaccinating, we ended up with these ear infections, and now I found out all these children are getting tubes in their ears.
Yeah.
Is that related to vaccines as well?
Yes, of course it is. And I love that. It just shows you how crazy the people are that are coming up with these things. You have a child that's got an inner ear infection, meaning, the doctor can see bulging of the eardrum and fluid in the ear when they look with their otoscope. So what's their treatment? Make a hole in the eardrum. I mean, if that's not insane, I don't know what is. It just keeps getting worse and worse all the time.
It does. There's no doubt about it. Well, this was wonderful. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this information with you and get feedback from you and learn from you as well.
Well, and thank you, and I'll definitely have you on again. Al and Ingrid Castle have a show on republicbroadcasting.org every Sunday at 9 o'clock.
Saturday.
Saturday. In Defense of Humanity. Definitely encourage you to check that out because this information has to get out to people. This is a life changer, and I love the fact that you're coming up with solutions for us to cancel our adhesion contracts and get out of the system and basically turn it right back on them by saying, we know what you are, and we're not going to play your game.
Right. That's it. Sounds
Okay.
easy. Okay.
All right. Very good. Okay, we're basically out of time. Thanks again, and definitely keep in contact. And I'm always looking for good news, so let me know any good news you have to tell me.
We'll be happy to.
Okay. Keep up the good work. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.